America has spent decades trying to engineer its way out of water scarcity in the West. Massive dams reshaped rivers, reservoirs flooded canyons, tunnels pierced mountains, and billions of dollars flowed into infrastructure designed to move water from where it falls to where people need it. Yet a troubling question now hangs over the Colorado River Basin. Why is the United States building one of its largest new dams in decades at the same time one of its most important reservoirs continues to shrink? Why are new storage projects rising across Colorado while Lake Powell, a reservoir so large it once symbolized water abundance in the American Southwest, remains trapped in a cycle of decline? And after generations of construction aimed at securing water supplies, has the region reached a point where building more infrastructure no longer guarantees more water? Those questions have become increasingly difficult to ignore as Colorado approaches completion of the Chimney Hollow Reservoir Project, a massive new water storage system west of Carter Lake in northern Colorado. The project represents one of the largest dam construction efforts in the United States in more than 2 decades. It is designed to capture and store water connected to the Colorado River system, providing greater reliability for growing communities along Colorado's Front Range. At nearly the same time, Lake Powell continues to face persistent shortages, declining inflows, and recurring warnings about critically low water levels. The contrast between these developments has become one of the most striking symbols of the modern water crisis in the American West. The Chimney Hollow Reservoir Project has been under development for years, but its completion marks a significant moment in the history of Western water management. The reservoir is designed to hold approximately 90,000 acre-feet of water, equivalent to more than 111 million cubic meters or roughly 30 billion gallons. Construction began in the early 2020s and is expected to allow water storage operations to begin during the middle of this decade. The overall cost has climbed into the hundreds of millions of dollars, reflecting the scale of the engineering effort involved. At the center of the project stands a dam approximately 350 feet high, or about 107 meters. The structure stretches thousands of feet across a valley that previously contained no major reservoir. Unlike the towering concrete walls that defined many 20th century dam projects, Chimney Hollow relies heavily on rock-fill construction and an asphalt core designed to reduce seepage. Engineers have described it as one of the largest dam projects completed in the United States in decades. The reservoir does not create new water. That fact sits at the heart of both its purpose and the controversy surrounding it. Water stored in Chimney Hollow will originate from the Colorado River system through the existing Windy Gap project and related infrastructure. During periods when river flows are available, water can be diverted and stored for later use. The goal is not to increase total supply, but to improve reliability by allowing communities to save water during wetter periods and use it during dry conditions. For many communities along Colorado's rapidly growing Front Range, that reliability has become increasingly valuable. Population growth has transformed cities and towns stretching from Fort Collins through Boulder and beyond. Municipal water providers have spent years searching for ways to secure future supplies as development continues and drought conditions become more common. Chimney Hollow emerged from that search as a storage solution intended to smooth out fluctuations in river flows and seasonal runoff. Yet while construction crews assembled millions of tons of rock and earth to create a new reservoir, conditions farther downstream continued to deteriorate. Lake Powell, located along the Arizona-Utah border, remains one of the largest artificial reservoirs in North America. Created by Glen Canyon Dam during the 1960s, it became a central component of the Colorado River system. The reservoir serves multiple functions. It stores water, generates hydroelectric power, regulates river flows, and helps fulfill legal water delivery obligations among states that share the river. For decades, it appeared almost permanent, a vast inland lake carved into desert sandstone. That image has changed dramatically during the past quarter century. The Colorado River Basin has experienced one of the most severe long-term drought periods in recorded history. Scientists often describe the event as a megadrought because of its duration and intensity. Higher temperatures have compounded the effects of reduced precipitation, increasing evaporation, and reducing runoff efficiency. Even when snowfall occurs, more water is lost before it reaches rivers and reservoirs. The result has been a steady reduction in the amount of water flowing into major storage systems throughout the basin. Lake Powell has become one of the most visible indicators of that transformation. Shorelines that once sat beneath deep water now stand exposed. Marina facilities have been repeatedly modified to accommodate lower water levels. Boat ramps have required extensions. Formerly submerged sections of Glen Canyon have reappeared in some locations as reservoir elevations declined. The reservoir has repeatedly approached levels that threatened hydroelectric generation and raised concerns about operational flexibility at Glen Canyon Dam. Forecasts issued during recent years have shown how fragile the situation remains. Low snowpack across the Rocky Mountains continues to reduce anticipated runoff into Lake Powell. In some years, projected inflows have fallen dramatically below historical averages. Water managers have responded by implementing emergency releases from upstream reservoirs and modifying operations throughout the basin in an effort to stabilize conditions. The paradox is striking. One part of the Colorado River system is receiving a major new reservoir, while another struggles to maintain enough water to support existing infrastructure. Understanding that paradox requires examining how Western water systems evolved. Much of the American West was developed under assumptions that now appear increasingly difficult to sustain. During the 20th century, planners relied on historical river flows that were unusually wet compared with longer-term climate records. Massive infrastructure projects were designed around expectations that rivers would continue producing similar volumes of water indefinitely. Reservoirs became the backbone of that strategy. By capturing spring runoff and storing it for later use, dams allowed cities, farms, and industries to thrive in regions where natural water availability fluctuated dramatically. The Colorado River became the most ambitious example of that approach. Stretching approximately 1,450 miles, or more than 2,300 kilometers, the river supplies water to millions of people across 7 states and parts of Mexico. A network of dams and reservoirs transformed its natural flow into one of the most heavily managed river systems in the world. For decades, the arrangement appeared successful. Large reservoirs such as Lake Mead and Lake Powell acted as savings accounts, storing water during wet years and releasing it during dry years. Their enormous capacities provided a sense of security. Water managers assumed that temporary shortages could be absorbed through storage accumulated during previous decades. The problem is that drought stopped being temporary. As the 21st century progressed, reservoir levels began falling faster than they could recover. Consecutive dry years gradually consumed storage reserves that had accumulated over generations. Meanwhile, population growth continued across the Southwest. Demand remained high even as supplies became increasingly uncertain. Lake Powell occupies a particularly difficult position within this system. It must balance water storage, downstream deliveries, hydropower generation, and interstate legal obligations. When inflows decline, every one of those functions becomes harder to maintain simultaneously. Water released to support downstream users cannot remain in storage. Water retained to protect reservoir levels may affect deliveries elsewhere. Each decision creates consequences across multiple states. Recent forecasts have highlighted the scale of the challenge. Inflows into Lake Powell have repeatedly fallen below normal expectations. Federal agencies have projected declining reservoir elevations under multiple scenarios, raising concerns about power generation capacity and long-term system stability. Emergency operational adjustments have become increasingly common. Against that backdrop, Chimney Hollow reflects a different strategy. Rather than serving the entire basin, the reservoir is designed primarily to improve local storage reliability. It represents an effort to maximize the usefulness of existing water rights and supplies rather than create entirely new sources. Supporters view it as a practical adaptation to uncertainty. If water becomes available during favorable runoff periods, storage capacity ensures that communities can preserve it for future use. Yet even that approach faces limitations. Storage only works when water exists to store. Reservoirs can redistribute water across time, but they cannot manufacture additional runoff. If climate conditions continue reducing flows throughout the Colorado River Basin, every storage project ultimately depends on a shrinking resource base. That reality has become increasingly apparent across the West. Reservoir construction historically reflected confidence in future supply. Modern projects often reflect concern about future scarcity. The distinction is significant. Earlier generations built dams because they expected continued growth in available water resources. Contemporary planners frequently build reservoirs because they fear future instability. The changing role of infrastructure can be seen in the design philosophy behind Chimney Hollow itself. Rather than emphasizing massive new diversions, the project focuses on managing existing allocations more efficiently. Water captured during limited periods of availability can be stored and delivered later when demand rises. It is a strategy rooted in flexibility rather than expansion. Meanwhile, Lake Powell remains tied to broader forces extending far beyond any single project. Climate trends continue affecting snowpack across the Rocky Mountains, which provide much of the river's water. Warmer temperatures reduce snow accumulation, accelerate melting, and increase evaporation losses. Even years with near-normal precipitation can produce disappointing runoff because more moisture disappears before reaching reservoirs. Researchers have increasingly focused on these temperature-driven effects when evaluating future water availability throughout the basin. The consequences extend beyond water supply alone. Hydroelectric facilities at major dams depend on adequate reservoir elevations. Lower water levels reduce generating efficiency and can eventually threaten power production altogether. Glen Canyon Dam, which created Lake Powell, provides electricity for communities across the region. Maintaining sufficient water elevation has therefore become both a water management issue and an energy issue. Federal agencies have repeatedly intervened to protect critical reservoir thresholds. Water releases from upstream facilities have been used to supplement Lake Powell when conditions became particularly severe. Such measures can provide temporary relief, but they do not eliminate the underlying imbalance between supply and demand. Instead, they redistribute water within the system while broader negotiations continue regarding future management rules. Those negotiations have become increasingly urgent because major operational guidelines governing the Colorado River are approaching transition points. States throughout the basin continue debating how future shortages should be shared and how reservoir operations should adapt to changing conditions. The discussions involve complicated legal frameworks developed over generations, many of which were created under hydrological assumptions that no longer match modern realities. The emergence of projects such as Chimney Hollow occurs within that broader uncertainty. In practical terms, the reservoir may help participating communities manage local water needs more effectively. It may improve reliability during dry years and provide additional operational flexibility. Those objectives are important for rapidly growing regions facing increasing pressure on existing supplies. But the reservoir also highlights a larger truth about Western water management. New infrastructure is no longer being built in an era of expanding abundance. It is being built in an era of constrained resources. That distinction shapes nearly every aspect of contemporary water planning. Historically, reservoirs often represented confidence that future growth could be supported through engineering. Today, reservoirs increasingly represent attempts to preserve reliability despite declining certainty. The goal is not necessarily to support unlimited expansion, but to reduce vulnerability to shortages. Lake Powell illustrates why that shift has occurred. Even with one of the largest reservoir systems ever constructed, the Colorado River Basin continues confronting difficult trade-offs. Reservoir storage can buffer drought, but prolonged reductions in river flows eventually overwhelm storage reserves. Decades of accumulated water can disappear when inflows remain persistently low. Chimney Hollow therefore enters service during a period unlike any faced by many 20th-century dam projects. Its success will depend not only on engineering performance, but also on future hydrology. Water must remain available for diversion and storage. Snowpack conditions must continue producing usable runoff. River operations must accommodate competing demands throughout the basin. Every component remains connected to broader environmental conditions that no reservoir can fully control. The project has already attracted attention for issues extending beyond water storage. Reports during construction indicated the discovery of uranium associated with rock materials used in the dam structure, creating additional monitoring and management considerations as the reservoir approaches operational status. The development added another layer of complexity to a project already shaped by environmental and hydrological challenges. Despite such complications, construction has advanced toward completion. Water deliveries are expected to begin gradually, with filling operations projected to occur over multiple years rather than immediately. That timeline reflects both engineering requirements and the realities of water availability within the Colorado River system. The image of a new reservoir filling while Lake Powell continues struggling with declining water levels may appear contradictory at first glance. In reality, both developments emerge from the same underlying challenge. Communities are attempting to adapt to a future in which water is less predictable than it once seemed. One response involves building infrastructure capable of storing available supplies more efficiently. Another involves modifying reservoir operations, negotiating new allocation agreements, and reducing vulnerability to shortages. Neither approach guarantees success on its own. Both reflect recognition that historical assumptions about Western water availability are increasingly difficult to maintain. For much of the 20th century, the defining question of Western water development centered on how to capture and distribute more water. Today, the question is different. The challenge increasingly involves deciding how to manage less. Chimney Hollow Reservoir stands as a modern answer to that challenge, a vast new storage system built not because water is plentiful, but because it is uncertain. At the same time, Lake Powell remains a reminder that even the largest reservoirs have limits when drought persists for decades. The two projects, separated by hundreds of miles but connected by the same river system, reveal a changing reality across the American West. Engineers can construct new dams. Communities can expand storage capacity. Governments can revise operating rules and negotiate new agreements. Yet none of those actions alters the fundamental equation driving the region's water future. The Colorado River supplies less water than many earlier generations expected. Demand remains immense. Temperatures continue rising. Reservoirs continue bearing the burden of balancing those pressures. That is why a brand new dam can rise in Colorado while Lake Powell keeps shrinking. The issue is no longer whether the West can build reservoirs. The issue is whether reservoirs alone can keep pace with a river system undergoing one of the most significant transformations in its modern history. The contrast between Chimney Hollow Reservoir and Lake Powell also reflects a broader shift in how water security is measured across the American West. In earlier decades, success was often defined by the size of a reservoir, the height of a dam, or the amount of water that could be stored behind concrete and earth. Larger projects were viewed as evidence that future growth could be accommodated indefinitely. Today, water managers face a different reality. Storage capacity remains important, but the value of that storage increasingly depends on whether sufficient runoff exists to replenish it. This challenge is especially evident during years when mountain snowpack appears healthy at first glance, but ultimately produces less runoff than expected. Warmer conditions can cause snow to melt earlier, increase evaporation from soils and vegetation, and reduce the amount of water that eventually reaches streams and reservoirs. As a result, forecasts based solely on snowfall totals have become less reliable indicators of future water supply. The Colorado River Basin has repeatedly experienced situations in which runoff efficiency declined, leaving major reservoirs with smaller gains than anticipated despite seemingly favorable winter conditions. Chimney Hollow was conceived in part to address short-term variability, allowing participating water providers to capture available supplies when opportunities arise. However, the project cannot operate independently of conditions throughout the larger Colorado River system. Every gallon stored in the reservoir remains linked to the same watershed that feeds Lake Powell, Lake Mead, and countless communities across the Southwest. The reservoir may strengthen local resilience, but it does not insulate the region from long-term hydrological trends. As the reservoir begins filling over the coming years, its progress will likely be watched alongside the fluctuating elevations of Lake Powell. The two reservoirs represent different generations of Western water development. One emerged during an era defined by confidence in large-scale expansion. The other was built during a period marked by adaptation, conservation, and uncertainty. Together they illustrate how dramatically the conversation surrounding water has changed. The focus is no longer simply on storing more water when it is available, but on managing a future in which every stored acre-foot may become increasingly valuable.